When a wealthy young man moves into Netherfield Park Manor, the village of Meryton is abuzz with excitement, and none more so than Mrs. Bennet, who has 5 unmarried daughters. The Bennets are not wealthy, and as they have no sons, their estate is entailed, meaning that it will pass to a male relation after Mr. Bennet's death. This unfortunate circumstance means Mrs. Bennet is fiercely determined to see all her daughters married off to eligible bachelors as soon as possible and by any means necessary. Their eldest daughter, Jane, is beautiful and kind, while Elizabeth, the second eldest, is intelligent, witty, and strong-willed. The 3 youngest Bennets are not quite so well-rounded, as Mary is only interested in her books, and Kitty and Lydia are completely obsessed with gossip and flirting with everything that moves. At the next town ball, the young man, named Mr. Bingley, immediately charms everybody with his good looks and friendly personality, but he is particularly attracted to Jane, and dances with her almost the whole night. His entourage are not quite so well received, however, as his sisters are snobby and cold, and his friend, Mr. Darcy, although twice as wealthy and very handsome, is even more unpleasant. He refuses to dance with any woman in the room apart from Bingley's sisters, and even insults Elizabeth Bennet as not being pretty enough to tempt him to dance. Overhearing his comment, Elizabeth laughs it off, but understandably also takes an instant dislike to him. Over the next few weeks, however, Darcy begins to find himself increasingly attracted to Elizabeth's intelligence and beauty, even though she is completely oblivious to this. Bingley and Jane have also grown much more attached, and to seal the deal, Mrs. Bennet schemes to have Jane caught in the rain while visiting Netherfield, so that she is forced to stay the night. Unfortunately, she gets very ill as a result, and Elizabeth, concerned about her welfare, hikes through miles of mud and dirt to look after her, much to the disgust of Bingley's sisters, who make little attempt to hide their dislike of her, particularly the unmarried Miss Bingley, who has designs to marry Darcy and is jealous of his attraction to her. When Jane finally recovers, she and Elizabeth head home, just in time for the arrival of Mr. Collins, a distant cousin who is the heir to the Bennet estate due to the entailment. Mr. Collins is a clergyman and a pretentious fool who thinks rather a lot of himself since he is employed by the eminent Lady Catherine de Bourgh, whom he adores and constantly brown-noses. His visit is for the sole purpose of choosing a wife from among the Bennet girls, and Mrs. Bennet is keen to make that happen, since it would mean the estate stays in the family. To her dismay, Elizabeth is the unfortunate object of Mr. Collins' awkward attentions, which is especially unwanted when she starts to take a liking to Mr. Wickham, a charming and handsome officer in the military regiment who are temporarily camped in Meryton. Even more enticing is the fact that they have a mutual dislike of Mr. Darcy, as Wickham reveals that he was cheated out of an inheritance left to him by Darcy's father after his death. Soon after, Bingley throws a ball at Netherfield, mainly as an excuse to dance with Jane, as they spend nearly the whole evening together. However, the rest of the Bennet family seem determined to make themselves look like fools with their inappropriate behaviour, which Elizabeth is completely embarrassed by. And just to make her night worse, she discovers that Wickham has decided not to come to the ball, as he doesn't want to cause a scene between him and Mr. Darcy. This disappointment, in addition to his wrongs against Wickham, firmly cements Elizabeth's negative opinion of him. Unfortunately, Mr. Collins has not been put off by Elizabeth's obvious disinterest in him, and to her horror, he proposes to her out of the blue. Elizabeth rejects him, of course, but the pain of this refusal is soon mended when her best friend Charlotte Lucas persuades him to marry her instead. One day, without warning, Jane receives word that Bingley, his sisters, and Darcy have all left Netherfield suddenly and are not expected to return, effectively crushing her and her mother's dreams. Heartbroken, she goes to stay with her aunt in London, while Elizabeth accompanies Charlotte's family to Hunsford Lodge to pay a visit to her newly married friend. While there, the whole party are treated to many visits to the grand abode of Lady Catherine de Bourgh herself, and Elizabeth learns that she expects Darcy to marry her daughter, since he is her nephew. To her surprise, the man himself shows up to visit his aunt, and begins to behave quite strangely towards her. Not long after, she receives a letter from Jane, who has sadly realized that Bingley's sisters did not like her as she once thought, and in fact, conspired to break them up. Elizabeth knows that Darcy must have also been involved in this plot, which angers her so much that she has to stay home from dinner at Lady Catherine's. At this totally ill-timed moment, Darcy turns up and confesses that he is in love with her, despite her lack of social status and embarrassing relations. Elizabeth is obviously offended by this extremely offensive way of proposing, and rejects him, accusing him of separating Bingley from her sister and mistreating Wickham. Darcy leaves in a huff, but the next day hands a letter to Elizabeth which goes into further detail about his actions. He admits to interfering in Bingley's relationship because he believed that Jane did not love him as much as he loved her, and also that the Bennet family's often inappropriate behaviour would harm his social standing. However, he also sheds light on what really happened between him and Wickham, revealing that he squandered the inheritance that was left to him, and attempted to elope with Darcy's teenage sister, Georgiana, in order to get his hands on her fortune and revenge himself against Darcy. Shocked by these revelations, Elizabeth slowly begins to reconsider her previous opinions of Darcy, realizing that she may have been too quick to believe Wickham because of her prejudice against him. A few months later, Elizabeth travels to Derbyshire with her aunt and uncle, and they decide to visit Pemberley, Darcy's grand estate, as they believe the family is away. However, Darcy shows up a day early, which catches them both off guard, and Elizabeth in particular because he seems like a totally different person, kind and attentive to her and her relations. Elizabeth begins to actually like Darcy as they spend more time together, and she even forms a bond with his sister. Everything quickly spirals downwards, however, when she receives the shocking news that Lydia, her youngest sister, has run away with Wickham and is living with him unmarried in London. This scandal would completely ruin the Bennet family, especially if they were to stay unmarried. When Darcy hears the news, he leaves abruptly, and Elizabeth fears that this latest impropriety by her family is the final nail in the coffin for any possible future relationship. Unbeknownst to Elizabeth, however, Darcy is still smitten with her, and takes it upon himself to track down Wickham and persuade him to marry Lydia by paying off his enormous debts. He does this in secret, insisting that Elizabeth's uncle take the credit for his actions. But a slip of the tongue by Lydia reveals his actions to Elizabeth, and this incredible gesture makes her realize that she is in love with him. As suddenly as he left, Bingley returns one day to Netherfield, and with the approval of Darcy, resumes his courtship of Jane. He soon proposes to her, and Jane happily accepts, to the absolute delight of Mrs. Bennet and the rest of the family. However, Elizabeth's happiness for her sister is soon dampened by the arrival of Lady Catherine, who very rudely accuses her of seducing a marriage proposal out of Darcy. Even though Elizabeth is sure that he no longer has feelings for her, she refuses to give Lady Catherine the satisfaction of promising that she will not accept him if he proposes. But not long after, Darcy surprises Elizabeth by proposing yet again, because he realized after Lady Catherine had also paid him a visit, that Elizabeth may have changed her feelings towards him. Since she is now totally in love with him, she joyfully accepts, just in time for a double wedding with her sister and Bingley. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for follow-up analysis videos soon to come. See you next time!